You've done everything right, you've polished your resume, researched the company, practiced your pitch, but there's one thing you forgot. No, not a typo on your resume, not a missed appointment. It's something much more mundane yet utterly important, your ID. You realize it just as you're about to walk into the lobby, and your stomach drops. What now? How do you explain this? Will this slip-up cost you the job? If you've ever felt the tension of a big moment, the panic of potentially blowing it, and the dread of seeing all your hard work unravel over something as simple as forgetting an ID, you're not alone. We've all been there, that feeling of anxiety creeping in when everything seems to hang in the balance. But what if I told you that despite this apparent disaster, not only did the interview still happen, but the candidate walked away with the job offer of a lifetime? That's right. The whole situation was turned upside down, and it's a story that's going to make you think twice about how to handle those inevitable moments of crisis. Stick with me, because you're going to want to know how this all played out, and more importantly, what it reveals about human nature, opportunity, and luck. Now, let's dive into the story. Let's talk about Emily. Emily had spent weeks preparing for this day, the day she'd finally land her dream job at a top-tier marketing firm. She had worked tirelessly, researching the company, networking with people in the industry, and practicing her responses to every question she could think of. This job was her ticket to a brighter future. But as she arrived at the office building, looking sharp in a suit that made her feel unstoppable, she suddenly froze. The one thing she had forgotten was, of all things, her ID. It was sitting safely on her kitchen counter, miles away from the interview. The interview that was about to start in just 10 minutes. Now, some of you might be wondering, how could someone forget something that important? Isn't that the first thing you check when preparing for an interview? Trust me, Emily had asked herself the same thing. But let's face it, we're all human. We've all had that moment where we get so caught up in the big picture that we overlook the little things. And in that moment, Emily was facing the kind of panic that no amount of prep work could have prepared her for. She stood there in the lobby, her palms sweating, wondering if this was the end of the road. Should she just turn around, apologize, and leave, chalking it up as a mistake? Or was there a way she could still make this work? Now, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt completely out of control, but somehow you found a way to turn it around? Maybe it wasn't as dramatic as forgetting an ID for an important interview, but we've all faced those moments when we felt like we were on the edge of failure. The trick, though, is how you handle those moments. Do you crumble under pressure, or do you take a deep breath and think outside the box? What Emily didn't know at that moment was that her ability to stay calm and think quickly would not only save the interview but could also lead to the job offer of a lifetime. And here's where things get interesting. Emily wasn't the only one who felt the weight of the situation. The hiring manager, Sarah, was equally aware that this was an important moment not just for the company, but for Emily as well. And Sarah's response to the mistake would shape the entire outcome of the interview. You see, when you're in a position of power, how you respond to someone else's mistake speaks volumes about your character and the kind of company you run. In this case, Sarah's reaction to Emily's ID mishap would have consequences that neither of them could predict. I know you're probably wondering, what happened next? How did Emily recover from such a huge mistake? I promise you, this story isn't what you might expect. There's a twist, and it's one that will leave you rethinking how we view success, failure, and second chances. But before I dive into that, let's take a closer look at the psychology of the moment. The pressure of an interview is one thing. The fear of making a mistake is another. And when that mistake is something as seemingly small as forgetting an ID, it becomes a test of character for both the candidate and the interviewer. So, as Emily stands there, debating whether to turn back or to keep going, the clock ticking away in the background, what do you think is going through her mind? Fear, doubt, and perhaps a flicker of hope that she could still somehow salvage this. But beyond that, there's something else, a realization that this moment, this slip-up, might actually be the key to something bigger. After all, the world isn't always about perfection. Sometimes, it's about resilience. Sometimes, it's about how you handle the unexpected. And in Emily's case, this forgotten ID might just be the very thing that leads her to the job she's always dreamed of. But don't think for a second that this story is over. If anything, It's just beginning. And here's the kicker. Not only did Emily walk away with the job offer, but she learned a crucial lesson that could change how she approaches every challenge in the future. What happened in that interview wasn't just about recovering from a mistake. It was about something deeper. Something that could help all of us in our own lives when we're faced with those moments of panic and pressure. So stay tuned, because in just a moment, I'll reveal how Emily managed to turn a forgotten idea into the opportunity of a lifetime. You won't want to miss what happens next, because this twist is going to surprise you in ways you never saw coming. Trust me, you'll want to see how this all unfolds. The lessons we can all learn from this story are far more powerful than you might think. So stick with me, the best part is yet to come. And remember, no matter what you're facing right now, no matter how big or small the challenge is in your own life, it's all about how you respond. You never know, the greatest opportunities might come from the most unexpected places. As Emily stood frozen in the lobby, her mind raced through the events leading up to this moment, desperately trying to piece together what had gone wrong. She had been so meticulous about every detail, her resume was flawless, her answers to common interview questions rehearsed 100 times over in front of the mirror, and she had even spent hours researching the company's culture, values, and latest projects. This interview, at this particular marketing firm, was her big break. It was the kind of opportunity most people only dreamed of, and she couldn't afford to blow it. But now, here she was, caught in the most embarrassing situation of her life, all because she'd forgotten to pack her ID. Her fingers clutched the strap of her handbag, the cold leather strangely grounding her as she tried to think clearly. The more she thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed. How had she managed to forget something so critical? She'd spent the entire night before reviewing her documents, laying them out on her kitchen table with precision, her resume, her portfolio, her list of references, and yet somehow, in her frenzy this morning, she hadn't even thought to check for the one thing that would allow her to enter the building, her ID. The truth was, Emily had been feeling a lot of pressure lately. And remember, no matter what you're facing right now, no matter how big or small the challenge is in your own life, it's all about how you respond. You never know, the greatest opportunities might come from the most unexpected places. As Emily stood frozen in the lobby, her mind raced through the events leading up to this moment, desperately trying to piece together what had gone wrong. She had been so meticulous about every detail, her resume was flawless, her answers to common interview questions rehearsed 100 times over in front of the mirror, and she had even spent hours researching the company's culture, values, and latest projects. This interview, at this particular marketing firm, was her big break. It was the kind of opportunity most people only dreamed of, and she couldn't afford to blow it. But now, here she was, caught in the most embarrassing situation of her life, all because she'd forgotten to pack her ID. Her fingers clutched the strap of her handbag, the cold leather strangely grounding her as she tried to think clearly. The more she thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed. How had she managed to forget something so critical? She'd spent the entire night before reviewing her documents, laying them out on her kitchen table with precision, her resume, her portfolio, her list of references, and yet somehow, in her frenzy this morning, she hadn't even thought to check for the one thing that would allow her to enter the building, her ID. The truth was, Emily had been feeling a lot of pressure lately. It wasn't just the excitement of the interview that had her on edge, it was the weight of everything else in her life. For the past few months, things had been spiraling in ways she didn't know how to fix. Her relationship with her boyfriend, Jason, had become strained. What had once been an easygoing partnership now felt more like a constant tug-of-war. There were moments where she felt suffocated by his need for reassurance, and then others when she questioned if their relationship was really going anywhere. It had been hard to balance that with her intense focus on getting the job. And then there were the financial worries that constantly loomed over her head: student loans, credit card bills, rent that seemed to climb higher every month. Each of these worries piled up, building a quiet storm of anxiety that Emily tried to push aside during the day, but that haunted her every night. It had been during one of these late-night anxiety sessions that Emily had stumbled across the job listing for this marketing firm. The more she read about it, the more it felt like fate. This was her shot to turn things around, to break free from the uncertainty of her current situation, and finally build a career she could be proud of. But with that hope came an equally heavy sense of responsibility. She needed this job. She had to get it. And so, when she had woken up late this morning, her heart racing because she was running behind, she had shoved all the nervous thoughts aside, only to have them come crashing back now that she was standing in the lobby, completely unprepared for what was unfolding. She glanced around, trying to find a way out of her predicament. The receptionist behind the desk was looking at her expectantly, but Emily could tell that she didn't know what to do either. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on her chest, the kind of pressure that comes when you've made a mistake that could cost you everything. But what bothered her the most was that something didn't feel right. The more she thought about it, the more Emily realized that this job interview, her future, the opportunity of a lifetime, it wasn't just about her. Something else was at play here. Could it be possible that someone else had noticed her desperation? Had the interviewer, Sarah, already sized her up before she even walked into the room? Emily had been told by friends that the company was notoriously selective, that getting past the first round was almost like winning the lottery. What if the reason Emily felt so uncertain wasn't just her nerves, but the knowledge that Sarah, the hiring manager, had seen through her carefully crafted exterior? After all, Emily was hardly the only candidate vying for this spot. There had been whispers around the office about a few others who had stood out, or, more precisely, a couple of candidates who had connections, who had been recommended by higher-ups at the firm. Emily had overheard her friend Lucas talking about a colleague of his, Derek, who had recently joined the company through a referral. He had no background in marketing but somehow still managed to land the role. Was there a chance that this job, her job, had already been promised to someone else? And then there was Sarah herself, the elusive and somewhat intimidating hiring manager. Emily had done some research, of course, trying to dig into her professional background. Sarah was known for being direct, for having high expectations, and for rejecting candidates she deemed unworthy, sometimes even without so much as a second glance. But something about her seemed off to Emily. Her resume looked impeccable, no doubt, but it was the subtle comments Sarah had made during their brief phone call the week before that left Emily with a lingering sense of unease. She had a sharpness to her voice that wasn't just about professionalism. There was something colder, almost like she enjoyed playing with people's nerves. Emily had chalked it up to the pressure of the hiring process, but now, standing in this lobby, she wondered if she had missed something, some deeper, more unsettling aspect of Sarah's persona that could be playing into the high stakes of the interview. It was all these thoughts that made Emily hesitate. Was her forgotten ID just a small mistake, a simple oversight? Or was it a sign of something larger, a deeper vulnerability, a crack in the armor that she had so carefully built around herself? The more she thought about it, the more uncertain she became. She could feel her pulse racing, her thoughts spiraling out of control, when she heard the receptionist's voice again. "Miss Carter." It was Sarah. Emily had been so lost in her thoughts that she didn't realize the time had passed. Sarah was standing just a few feet away, her presence as commanding as it was intimidating. Emily had barely even registered her approach, but now she was staring directly at her, waiting. And for the first time, Emily wasn't sure if this was her shot at a dream job or if this was the moment when she would learn that everything she had worked for could be shattered by a single misstep. But just as she was about to speak, Sarah's lips curled into a faint smile, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. Was it sympathy she saw in Sarah's expression? Or was it something else? Something more calculating? And why did Emily feel like she was already being sized up, like Sarah had known exactly what was coming before it even happened? Everything hung in the balance now, and yet, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone else pulling the strings behind the scenes, something far bigger than her own mistake, something that would soon make itself known. Emily's heart raced as Sarah approached, her footsteps echoing in the quiet lobby. The tension between them felt almost tangible, like the air was thick with unspoken words. Sarah's faint smile made Emily uneasy, but she didn't have the time to fully process the moment. All she could focus on was the interview, the stakes, and the sense of dread creeping in. There was something Sarah wasn't saying, something that didn't quite add up, but before Emily could voice any of her concerns, Sarah broke the silence. "Miss Carter, right? I understand there's a small issue with your ID," Sarah said, her tone still cool but not unkind. Emily nodded quickly, the words stumbling out of her mouth in a rush as she explained how she'd forgotten it. She tried to keep it together, but the anxiety in her chest felt suffocating. Sarah, however, merely nodded and motioned for her to follow. "Let's head to the conference room. We'll sort it out there." For a brief moment, Emily wondered if this was going to be the end of her shot. Maybe Sarah would simply tell her to leave, maybe she wouldn't even get to finish the interview. But there was something in the way Sarah's eyes flickered, something calculating, that made Emily think there was more to this than just a forgotten ID. She followed Sarah silently through the hallways, her thoughts racing. But when they entered the conference room, the mood shifted in an instant. Emily took a seat, her palms sweating as she waited for Sarah to take the lead. But before Sarah could speak, Emily noticed something odd. Her folder, the one with all her carefully prepared documents, was missing. It wasn't on the table where she had left it, nor anywhere in the room. She could feel her pulse quicken again, a fresh wave of panic washing over her. Was it possible that someone had taken it? Someone who knew about her little slip-up and decided to sabotage her? "Are you all right?" Sarah's voice broke through Emily's thoughts, but the question didn't sound sincere. It was almost as if Sarah was testing her, watching her every move. Emily could feel the room closing in, the walls getting tighter around her. I think my folder is gone," Emily said, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. "It was right here, with all my documents. I don't know what happened to it." Sarah's expression flickered for a moment, her lips tightening into a thin line. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied smoothly, her tone now hard and distant. "Perhaps you're just imagining things. You seemed a little distracted earlier." Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I'm not imagining it," she said, her voice rising slightly, frustration creeping into her words. "I had everything prepared, and now it's gone. Don't you think that's a little strange?" Sarah's eyes narrowed, and for a second, Emily thought she saw something that almost resembled fear, but it disappeared too quickly to be sure. "It's not uncommon for candidates to misplace things when they're nervous," Sarah said, her voice low and calm, but there was an undercurrent of something unsettling in her words. "But this conversation isn't about your folder. We're here to talk about your qualifications, Ms. Carter. Are you prepared for that?" Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on here than just a missing folder or a forgotten ID. Something didn't add up. But she had no proof. No way to even explain what was happening without looking like she was spiraling. And the more she tried to focus on the interview itself, the more it felt like Sarah was pushing her off course, subtly steering the conversation in directions that made her feel disoriented and paranoid. She forced herself to calm down, taking deep breaths. "Focus on the job," she told herself. "Just get through this interview. Get the offer, and everything will be fine." But the nagging feeling that something was wrong, that someone was messing with her, wouldn't go away. It wasn't until later that day, when she was back in her apartment, that Emily began to put the pieces together. She had barely closed her front door before she grabbed her phone and called Lucas, her old college friend who had once been an intern at the same firm. Emily had always trusted Lucas, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she actually knew about his time at the company. The fact that he'd left so suddenly, the way he'd spoken about the firm's culture with mixed feelings, none of it added up to something as innocent as a mere career change. "Hey, Lucas," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "Do you know anything about how they operate over there?" "I don't know, something feels off. It's like they're hiding something." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Lucas replied, his voice lower than usual. "Emily, listen to me. Don't dig any deeper into that place. Just trust me on this one." His words hit her like a punch in the gut. What did he mean by that? Was Lucas trying to warn her, or was he somehow involved in whatever was going on behind the scenes? She pressed for more details, but he kept deflecting, his answers growing more evasive. The more she asked, the more defensive he became, until finally, he cut the conversation short. "Look, I don't want to get into this. Just focus on the interview and forget about everything else." Emily hung up, her thoughts swirling. What did he know? Why was he so intent on shutting down her questions? And why did she feel like she was being watched? It was as if someone had put a target on her back the moment she walked into that office, and now, with her own friend acting so suspicious, she was more certain than ever that something wasn't right. Over the next few days, the sense of unease only grew. Emily spent hours at her computer, retracing every step of her application process, going over every detail of the interview, and rechecking her emails. But as much as she dug, the answers only seemed to slip further out of reach. That was when the second strange thing happened. She returned to the company's website to check some details about the job listing, only to find that the page had been removed. It wasn't down for maintenance or being updated. It was completely gone. Emily sat in front of her screen, staring at the blank space where the job posting had once been, her mind racing. Why would they pull the listing so suddenly? Was it because they had already chosen someone? Or was there something about her application they didn't want her to see? It was the final clue that told her something much deeper was going on, something that involved people she had trusted, people who were no longer who they seemed. But as she prepared to investigate further, she received an unexpected message, one that made her blood run cold. Stop digging into things you don't understand. There are eyes on you now. No signature. No clue as to who had sent it. Just those cryptic words that left Emily frozen in fear. She looked around her apartment, feeling a cold shiver crawl up her spine. Who was watching her? And what had she gotten herself into? The deeper she dug, the more she felt like the walls were closing in. Whatever secret the company was hiding, Emily was dangerously close to uncovering it. But with every step forward, it seemed that the people around her, even those she thought she could trust, were pulling away. What was the real cost of finding the truth? And could Emily survive whatever she had uncovered, or had she just stumbled into something much darker than she could ever have imagined? Emily's fingers hovered over her phone, the message still lingering on the screen like a cold shadow. Stop digging into things you don't understand. There are eyes on you now. It felt like a warning, a threat, even one that came with a weight she couldn't ignore. But the message didn't just stop there. It planted a seed of doubt, making her question everything she thought she knew about the situation. Who was behind this? Why her? And most chilling of all, why now? She had been careful, so careful, not to stir the pot too much, but here she was, tangled in a web of lies, with no clear way out. As the hours passed and she continued to mull over the cryptic words, Emily found herself feeling more and more isolated. She couldn't trust anyone, not even herself. But things took a turn when she received an unexpected phone call late that night. The number wasn't familiar, and there was no name attached to the incoming call. Hesitating for only a second, she answered, her voice tight with anxiety. Hello. A low, familiar voice came through the receiver, sending a chill down her spine. It's Lucas. You need to stop looking into things, Emily. You're getting in too deep. Her heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? Why are you calling me like this? I thought we were friends. There was a long pause, and for a moment, Emily could almost hear the hesitation in Lucas's voice. You don't know what you're messing with, he finally said, his tone now filled with urgency. I told you to drop it, but you didn't listen. This is bigger than you realize. You're not the only one they're watching. Someone else is in danger too. Emily's mind spun as she tried to make sense of his words. What do you mean? Who else? What danger are you talking about? But Lucas's response wasn't reassuring. He muttered something under his breath, and then the line went dead, leaving her with a sinking feeling in her stomach. He had sounded desperate, like someone who was trying to warn her but was too scared to say more. It wasn't just the firm anymore, it was something else, something that had roots deeper than she could even comprehend. But who was Lucas really? Was he involved, or was he simply another pawn in a much larger game? She didn't know what to believe anymore, and with each passing second, the mystery seemed to stretch further out of her reach. She had to know more. But the price for answers was beginning to feel too high. The next morning, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of unease. As if everything was closing in on her. She had tried calling Lucas back several times, but his phone went straight to voicemail each time. It wasn't like him to just disappear, especially after the conversation they had. Something was off, and Emily couldn't ignore the nagging sense that she was missing something important. But before she could dwell on it too long, there was another unsettling development. She had just sat down at her kitchen table, her mind still racing through the details of the night before, when she noticed something strange. Her email inbox was open, but there was a new message waiting at the top, one she didn't recognize. The subject line was short, "You're being watched." Her blood ran cold as she opened the message. It was brief, written in the same dispassionate tone as the previous warning. "Don't think you're the only one asking questions. You're not. We know about your connections. We know about your friend Lucas. You should stop looking into things before it's too late." This time, the threat felt far too personal. Lucas? Could he have been a part of this all along? Was he somehow tied into the company? Emily had trusted him for years, but now she didn't know who to believe. Who had sent her this message? And how much of it was true? Was Lucas playing her, or was he also a pawn being moved around by someone more dangerous than either of them realized? The cryptic nature of the message made her uneasy, but she couldn't ignore the one piece of information that stood out above the rest. "We know about your connections." The mention of connections rang louder than the rest of the message, especially considering how Emily had been trying to distance herself from the idea of using her network to get ahead. She had always prided herself on doing things on her own, without relying on favors or recommendations. But what if someone else had been manipulating things behind the scenes, pulling strings she couldn't see? And who were they to suggest that she was connected to Lucas in a way that made her a target? With her thoughts scattered and her nerves at the breaking point, Emily couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. She knew she needed to talk to Lucas, but something told her it might already be too late. She decided to go to his apartment, hoping to catch him before things escalated any further. Maybe he would explain everything, and maybe, just maybe, she could make sense of the whirlwind that was slowly consuming her life. But when she arrived at Lucas's building, her heart dropped. His door was slightly ajar, just enough to see inside. There was no movement, no sign of life from the apartment. Hesitating for only a moment, Emily pushed the door open, her breath catching in her throat as she stepped inside. The room was eerily quiet, but it wasn't just the silence that unnerved her, it was the sight that greeted her. Lucas's belongings were scattered around the room, his laptop wide open on the desk. But what caught her attention immediately was the large manila envelope lying on the floor in front of her, half hidden behind the chair. Curiosity and fear gripped her, and despite every instinct telling her to walk away, she bent down and picked it up. The envelope was sealed with no return address, no name, just a plain stamp. It was heavy in her hands, as if it contained something far more significant than any ordinary document. Without thinking, she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the text typed in bold, sharp letters, "You've been warned. There are bigger forces at play. You won't like where this leads." The words sent a jolt of cold fear through her, but it wasn't just the message that troubled her, it was the unmistakable sense that she had just uncovered a clue that would lead her deeper into a mystery she wasn't sure she could escape from. Just as she was about to examine it further, the sound of footsteps outside the door made her freeze. She quickly shoved the paper back into the envelope, heart racing. Who was it? Someone who knew she was here. Someone else involved in whatever twisted game had been unfolding? Emily had no answers yet, but one thing was clear, she was no longer just playing a role in this mystery. She was now a part of it, and whatever secrets Lucas was hiding. "You said." Emily's breath came in shallow bursts as she hurried down the dark alley, the chill of the night air biting at her skin. Her heart hammered in her chest, the pounding echoing in her ears like a drumbeat that refused to quiet. She kept telling herself she needed to keep moving, that she couldn't stop now, that she had no choice but to run. But something had shifted in her. The terror that had once driven her forward was now mingling with something darker. Doubt. A gnawing, relentless doubt that she couldn't shake. Everything was spinning out of control. The phone call with Lucas had only deepened the mystery, and now, in the quiet of the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial. Something huge. Her mind kept going back to that conversation, to the words Lucas had said right before the line went dead. They're not going to stop until they have what they want. What was it that they wanted? What was she truly a part of? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she was being led down a path that she couldn't fully understand, a path that had begun to feel like an endless loop of manipulation and fear. And then, just as she was about to turn onto another street, a thought hit her like a punch to the gut. What if Lucas wasn't the ally she thought he was? What if he had known more all along, had been playing her, pulling her into something that she had never signed up for. She shook her head, trying to push the thought away, but it lingered like a shadow, dark and ominous. Her footsteps faltered for a moment as her phone buzzed in her pocket. She almost didn't want to look, afraid that whatever message was waiting for her would only add another layer of confusion. But she couldn't ignore it. Not now. With trembling hands, she pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a text message, no number attached, just an anonymous contact. "You're asking the wrong questions, Emily." She stared at the words, her stomach twisting in a knot. The message felt like a taunt, as if someone was watching her from the darkness, waiting for her to make the wrong move. She was too deep now. Too far down the rabbit hole to just walk away. But what was the truth? Who was on her side? Her mind spun as she considered the possibility. Maybe this whole thing wasn't about the company at all. Maybe it wasn't about her interview, or her sudden promotion, or even the strange disappearance of Lucas. What if the answers she was desperately searching for were right in front of her, and she just hadn't seen it yet? She had been focused on all the wrong pieces. The warnings, the threats, the strange disappearances, they were all part of a larger picture, one that had nothing to do with her at all. The realization hit her like a freight train, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop spinning. The last few days had been a blur of uncertainty and fear, but now everything was beginning to make sense. The key, she realized, was Lucas. Not in the way she had thought, though. No, Lucas hadn't been the one pulling the strings. He had been a pawn, just like her. Someone had manipulated both of them, playing them against each other, making them think they were part of something far bigger than they were. The people who had been watching her, sending her messages, threatening her, they hadn't been after her at all. They had been after something else entirely. Something that she had unknowingly been sitting on the entire time. Her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. This time, it was a call. The name on the screen made her freeze. It was Lucas. She hesitated for a moment, uncertainty washing over her. Was this a trap? Was he calling her to finish the job, to tie up the loose ends of whatever game they had been playing? Or was this the moment where everything finally clicked into place? Against her better judgment, Emily answered the call. "Lucas," she said, her voice shaky, uncertain. There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of a door closing, muffled voices in the background. Lucas's voice came through, strained but clear. "Emily, you're in more danger than you think. You need to listen to me. I didn't want you to get involved. I never meant for this to go this far." The words sent a jolt of panic through her, but something in his tone told her this was different. It wasn't the same man who had warned her before, the one who had disappeared without a trace. No, this time, there was something raw, something desperate in his voice. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's going on? What are you not telling me?" There was a long pause, and when he finally spoke, his words came out in a rush. "You've been set up, Emily. All of it, the job, the promotion, the threats, it's all connected. You weren't supposed to get this far. They wanted you to stay in the dark, to stay out of it, but now it's too late. The files, Emily. The files you're looking for, they're not just documents. They're the key to everything. And you're not the only one who's been after them." Her head spun as she processed his words. The files. The ones she thought were just evidence of corruption in the company. What if they weren't just about exposing the truth? What if they were something more? Something so important that it had led to everything that had happened, the threats, the lies, the danger that seemed to be closing in around her. Before she could ask another question, the call was abruptly cut off. Emily stared at her phone, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to call him back, but the line was dead. And then, the world tilted. She heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. Her blood ran cold, and every instinct in her body screamed at her to run. She spun around, but there was no one there. The alley was empty, the streetlights flickering in the distance, casting long shadows across the pavement. But then, she saw something, a figure standing at the end of the alley, just far enough away that she couldn't make out their features. It was a person. No doubt about it. But their presence felt wrong. It was like a feeling of recognition mixed with the deepest, darkest sense of dread. Whoever it was, they were watching her, waiting for her to make the next move. Her mind raced. Could it be someone from the company? Was this the moment when everything was finally about to be revealed? Or was she simply being drawn into a deeper, darker game than she had ever imagined? The figure didn't move, just stood there, like a shadow in the distance. But Emily knew one thing for sure: she had to get out of there. She had no choice. Whatever game was being played, whatever was going on, it wasn't just about her anymore. And now, she was right in the middle of it. With a final, desperate glance toward the figure at the end of the alley, Emily turned and ran, her mind spinning with the realization that nothing, not the job, not the promotion, not even the messages and threats, was what it seemed. Everything had been leading her toward this moment. Toward this truth. And the moment she stopped running was the moment everything would come crashing down. Emily's heart thudded in her chest, the rhythm of her pulse almost drowning out the sound of her footsteps as she rushed down the deserted street. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get as far away as possible, but she knew it wasn't that simple. She couldn't outrun this. Not anymore. Not when everything she thought she knew about her life, about the people she trusted, had been turned upside down. She had to face it. She had to make the choice, even if it meant everything she'd built, the life, the career, the safety she'd worked so hard for, would crumble in an instant. She hadn't been running from danger. She'd been running from the truth. The text message from Lucas still burned in her mind, his last desperate words echoing in her ears. "You've been set up, Emily. You weren't supposed to get this far." She had told herself for days that this was all part of some twisted conspiracy, that whoever was behind it had to be stopped. But as she stood there in the cold, silent street, something in her gut told her it wasn't that simple. Lucas had warned her, but he'd also lied to her. The same man who had once been her confidant, the person she trusted more than anyone else in the world, had been playing her, just like everyone else. The truth was, there was no one left she could trust. Not even herself. As if the universe had decided to make it even harder for her, her phone buzzed in her pocket again, snapping her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out, the screen lighting up with a new message. It was from an unknown number. "Meet me at the old warehouse. Midnight. Come alone. If you don't, everything will fall apart." The words were simple enough, but the weight of them hit her like a punch to the stomach. The old warehouse. It was the place where she had met Lucas for the first time after her promotion. It had always felt like a neutral ground, somewhere safe. But now, with everything spiraling out of control, that place held a new, sinister meaning. She didn't know who had sent the message or what they wanted, but she could feel the pull. Whoever was behind it knew more than she did. They had the answers she so desperately needed. She couldn't ignore it. But the thought of walking into that warehouse, alone, felt like a death sentence. She was being forced into a corner, pushed to make a decision she wasn't ready to make. Her phone buzzed again, breaking the silence that had settled in the cold night air. Another message from Lucas, this time one that stopped her in her tracks. "They're watching you. Don't go to the warehouse. I'm coming to you. We need to talk before it's too late." But as Emily read the words, a voice in her mind screamed that it was all too convenient. Why hadn't he contacted her sooner? Why had he let her get so deep into this mess, only to suddenly appear with a warning now, when things had reached the breaking point? Was he really trying to help her? Or was he just as much a part of the web of lies as everyone else? Torn between the two options, Emily's hands shook as she tried to make sense of everything. She could go to the warehouse, where she might find the truth, the answers that had been slipping through her fingers like sand, or she could wait for Lucas, risking that he might be playing her again, just as he had before. If she went to the warehouse, she'd be putting herself in the hands of whoever had orchestrated all of this. But if she stayed, waiting for Lucas to show up, she might never get the answers she needed. She would be trapped, stuck in a cycle of waiting and uncertainty until she became just another victim of the game. But the emotional weight of the decision wasn't just about the risk of uncovering the truth. It was about everything she had built up until this point. Emily had worked her whole life to reach this moment. She had worked her way up in the company, navigated relationships, played the game of office politics, and sacrificed more than she cared to admit. She had trusted Lucas. She had believed in the career she had worked so hard to build. But now, everything she had worked for was at risk. The job she thought was the dream job had become the nightmare. And with each passing moment, she felt herself losing everything she had fought for. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound. A car approaching, its headlights illuminating the street ahead. Emily froze, her hand instinctively reaching for her phone, her eyes scanning the empty road. She couldn't see who was in the car, but the fact that it was driving toward her made her pulse spike with anxiety. This wasn't a safe neighborhood. It hadn't been for years. And no matter how much she wanted to believe that she could walk away from all of this, she knew deep down that she couldn't. She wasn't just facing a threat to her job or her safety. She was facing the collapse of everything she knew. Her life had been turned upside down, and there was no way out. Not anymore. The car stopped in front of her, the engine purring quietly as the driver's side window rolled down. The voice that came from within wasn't one she recognized at first, but it carried a certain calmness, a sense of familiarity that made her stomach twist in a way she couldn't explain. "Get in, Emily." It was Jenna. Her colleague. Her friend. Or so she had thought. For a moment, Emily stood there, frozen. The shock of seeing Jenna, the person who had always been there, someone she had trusted more than anyone else, made her heart skip a beat. But it wasn't just that. It was the look in Jenna's eyes, the way she seemed so calm, so assured, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. As if everything was already decided. And in that moment, Emily realized something she should have seen earlier. Jenna had been involved. She had known more than she let on, more than she had ever shared with Emily. "Jenna, what the hell is going on?" Emily's voice was shaky, a mix of disbelief and fury. "What are you involved in? What are you trying to get me into?" Jenna didn't flinch, didn't look away. Her expression remained almost too calm, too controlled. "You're running out of time. They've already made their move, and if you don't act fast, it's all over." Emily's mind was racing. The pieces were starting to fit, but the picture was one she couldn't quite make sense of. Was Jenna part of the game? Was she someone trying to stop it, or was she simply a pawn too, just like Emily had been? Jenna had always been the one who seemed to have all the answers, the one who told her how to navigate the corporate world, the one who had always been there to support her. But now, Emily wasn't sure whether she could trust anyone. Her closest friends, her colleagues, even Lucas, they all seemed to be caught in a tangled web, a game with stakes far higher than anything she had imagined. And now, here she was. Standing in front of the car, staring at Jenna, who was offering her an ultimatum. One final choice. The choice that would determine everything. "Get in, Emily," Jenna repeated, her voice soft but insistent. "You don't have much time. The truth is waiting for you, but you have to decide what you're willing to risk to find it." Every part of Emily screamed at her to run, to break free from all of this madness, to save herself. But deep down, she knew there was no running away anymore. The truth was calling her, even if it meant she had to lose everything in the process. The decision was hers. And as the car door opened, she knew that the next step could change everything or destroy it all. Emily's mind was spinning, her heart pounding in her chest as the door to the car slowly creaked open. There was no turning back now. She could feel it, that electric tension in the air, thick with anticipation and danger. She wasn't just stepping into a car. She was stepping into a world she didn't understand, one that was far bigger, far darker, than she had ever imagined. As Jenna's cold, emotionless eyes locked with hers, the reality of what was happening crashed down on her like a tidal wave. Jenna wasn't offering a safe escape. She was dragging her deeper into the chaos. "You don't have time to waste, Emily. We need to move. Now," Jenna urged again, her voice flat, but her tone leaving no room for argument. It wasn't the tone of a friend who was looking out for her, it was the tone of someone who knew exactly what was coming, who had already picked a side. And that side was no longer Emily's. "Where are we going?" Emily's voice barely sounded like her own, distant, lost in the vortex of everything she had learned in the past few days. She could barely hold it together anymore, her mind racing to put the pieces of this twisted puzzle in place. But there was one thing she knew for sure, this wasn't just about her anymore. She was a pawn, but so were countless others. Just get in. The rest will make sense soon enough, Jenna snapped, clearly impatient, but there was something else, something buried under the surface. Was it fear? Guilt? Emily couldn't tell. All she knew was that the more she looked at Jenna, the more she realized she didn't know her. Not like she thought she did. Reluctantly, her instincts fighting her every step of the way, Emily slid into the car. The doors locked behind her with an ominous click, and the car sped off, the city lights blurring as they drove into the night. The weight of what she was about to face pressed on her chest, but the suffocating sense of dread was nothing compared to the flood of questions in her mind. The phone calls, the texts, the threats, the missing people, they had all been leading her here, to this moment. And now she was trapped in a ride she couldn't escape, with no idea where it would take her or who would be waiting on the other side. Jenna glanced at her from the driver's seat, her face tight. "You really don't understand, do you?" she asked, almost sounding disappointed. "You've been running toward the wrong truth all along. But that's the way it works with people like you. You think it's about the job, about the promotion, about proving yourself. But none of it matters. None of it." Emily's stomach dropped. She had been chasing the wrong answers all along. "What do you mean? What is this all about?" Her voice was shaky, her words feeling foreign as they left her lips. Jenna didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pressed her foot harder on the accelerator, the car hurtling through the streets with a purpose, as if there was some destination she couldn't waste a second reaching. Emily's mind was racing. None of this made sense. None of it had ever made sense. And then, as the tension in the car reached its peak, Jenna finally spoke. Her voice was low, as though she was speaking to herself more than to Emily. "It's bigger than just you, Emily. It always has been. This isn't just about a few bad people in a corporate office. It's about control. Power. People in positions you can't even imagine, pulling the strings behind the scenes. And you've been walking right into it." The words hit Emily like a sucker punch to the gut. Her throat tightened, and for a moment, she could barely breathe. This wasn't just some corporate conspiracy. This wasn't just a game of office politics. This was about something massive, a power play on a scale she couldn't comprehend. "Who's behind it?" she gasped, her voice cracking. "Who's pulling the strings? Tell me the truth, Jenna." Jenna's eyes flickered to her, but she didn't respond. There was a long pause, as though the question hung in the air between them, heavy and unanswerable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jenna muttered, "You'll see soon enough." Emily felt the cold chill of fear slither up her spine. Something in Jenna's tone, something in the way she spoke, made it clear that she wasn't just being dragged into this. She was part of it. Jenna knew more than she was letting on, and the realization was like a slap to Emily's face. The person she had trusted, the one who had been her closest ally, was now the one guiding her to her own destruction. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was the sinking feeling in her gut that the web of betrayal stretched far beyond Jenna. That she was only one small thread in a network so vast, so entrenched, that even the people who seemed untouchable might not be safe. As they turned onto a quiet, desolate street, the air seemed to change. The buildings loomed around them, tall and empty, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Emily's heart began to race. This wasn't just a warehouse. She could feel it in her bones. This was the heart of everything, the place where the truth she was desperately chasing would either set her free or destroy her for good. The car screeched to a halt in front of an old, run-down building, its windows dark, its walls covered in layers of peeling paint and rust. Emily's stomach twisted. She could sense the danger lurking, the unknown that awaited her inside. Jenna didn't wait for her to speak. She was already out of the car, moving swiftly toward the entrance. Emily hesitated, the weight of everything crashing down on her. She could hear the faint hum of her phone vibrating in her pocket, another message, another call, but she couldn't bring herself to check it. There were too many questions, too many people pulling her in different directions. What would she do if she uncovered the truth? What would she lose in the process? Was it worth it? Before she could decide, Jenna was already inside the building. Emily's heart thudded as she followed, the weight of her footsteps echoing through the emptiness. The door slammed shut behind her, and for the first time, she realized how alone she really was. There was no going back now. They reached the heart of the warehouse. The lights flickered on as Jenna pushed open a door, and Emily was hit by the sight of what lay beyond it. Tables, chairs, scattered papers, and monitors filled the room, but it wasn't the mess that caught her attention. It was the people. The figures standing around the room, all wearing identical dark suits, their faces obscured by shadows. And then, her gaze landed on someone she recognized, someone she never thought she would see in this place, someone who had always seemed above it all. Her boss. The CEO. The truth crashed over her like a wave. Everything, the promotions, the threats, the lies, they had all been carefully orchestrated, planned out from the beginning. She had been part of this grand design. But now, it was too late. Too late to pull out, too late to stop. Her boss stepped forward, a cold smile on his face, and Emily felt her world shatter. This was the moment she had been running from, the moment when she realized she was no longer the victim. She was the one being played. "You've done well, Emily," he said, his voice smooth, calm, and completely devoid of any sympathy. "But now, it's time for you to make a choice." Emily's throat went dry, and she took an involuntary step back. This was the moment. The moment when everything changed. The room was eerily silent as Emily stood there, her heart pounding so hard in her chest she could feel the vibration in her fingertips. The shadows from the flickering lights seemed to stretch out and engulf her, casting strange, distorted shapes on the walls. Her breath was shallow, anxiety tightening around her chest like a vice. She had come this far. She had followed every lead, fought every instinct, every shred of doubt, just to end up here, trapped in the belly of the beast, face to face with the very people who had orchestrated the nightmare that had become her life. And standing in front of her, with a calm, calculated smile on his face, was her boss, the CEO, the man who had always seemed so untouchable, so beyond reproach. But as Emily's gaze fixed on him, she realized the truth. He wasn't untouchable. He was the puppet master, pulling strings from the shadows, controlling everything, and now, she was the final piece in his twisted puzzle. "You've done well to get this far," the CEO said, his voice smooth and calculating, as if he was delivering a rehearsed line. "But you should know, Emily, it was never really about you. You were just a test. A test to see how far you'd go, how far you'd fall for the game." His words sent a chill down her spine, but she couldn't back down now. She had come this far, discovered too much, learned too many secrets, to stop now. She clenched her fists at her sides, fighting the surge of panic that threatened to overwhelm her. "What game, exactly? What do you want from me?" The CEO's smile never wavered. "It's not about what I want from you. It's about control. Power. The ability to manipulate people like you, people who think they're in control. People who think they have a choice. But in the end, they don't." Emily's mind raced as she processed his words. This wasn't just about a corporate takeover. It wasn't about a job or even the power behind it. This was about something much bigger. Something insidious. Something that made her feel small and insignificant in the face of it all. The realization hit her like a gut punch. This wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a system. A system designed to crush people like her, to make them feel like they were winning while they were being quietly, methodically destroyed. And she was the final step in that system. Her gaze flicked to the others in the room. The figures in the dark suits, standing like silent sentinels, watching her every move. They had been a part of this plan all along. She was just the last cog in the machine. But she wasn't going to be a pawn anymore. Not now. Not after everything she had uncovered. "You think you can control me? You think you can break me?" Emily's voice shook, but she stood her ground, her eyes locked on the CEO, her body tense, every muscle ready to spring into action. "You've made one big mistake. I'm not just a player in your game. I'm the one who's going to bring it all down." The CEO's eyes narrowed, his expression faltering for just a second, but it was enough. Emily felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't just another piece on the board. She wasn't going to let him win. She had spent too long running from the truth, hiding in the shadows, but now she was done hiding. With every ounce of strength she had left, Emily reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the one piece of evidence she'd been clinging to, a small, seemingly insignificant flash drive. She had stolen it from his office earlier, before everything went south, but she hadn't known what was on it. She only knew it was important. Crucial. The CEO's eyes flickered to the flash drive, and a look of recognition passed over his face. "So, you finally figured it out," he murmured, his voice laced with a dark amusement. "But it's too late. You're too late." Before Emily could react, there was a sudden movement. One of the figures in the room, a man who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she recognized him. It was Lucas. But the man she had once trusted, the one who had warned her, who had seemed like her only ally, was no longer the person she thought he was. He wasn't just playing both sides. He was working for them. He had always been working for them. The twist hit her like a sledgehammer, the full weight of the betrayal crashing down in an instant. "You." Emily choked, her voice barely a whisper. "You were behind this. All along." Lucas's expression remained cold, calculating. There was no remorse in his eyes. No guilt. "You were a means to an end, Emily. You were always disposable," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The plan was to bring you in, get you to trust me, and then use you as leverage. And you played right into it." Her world crumbled in an instant. The man she had trusted, the one she had confided in, the one she had believed was on her side, had been manipulating her from the start. She had been nothing more than a pawn in his game, a tool to be used and discarded. The emotional weight of the betrayal threatened to crush her, but there was no time to mourn. No time to dwell on what had been lost. She looked back at the CEO, whose smug smile had only grown wider, knowing that the final piece of the puzzle was now in his hands. This was the moment she had been running from, the moment when she realized she was no longer the victim. She was the one being played. "You've done well, Emily," he said, his voice smooth, calm, and completely devoid of any sympathy. "But now, it's time for you to make a choice." Emily's throat went dry, and she took an involuntary step back. This was the moment. The moment when everything changed. The room was eerily silent as Emily stood there, her heart pounding so hard in her chest she could feel the vibration in her fingertips. The shadows from the flickering lights seemed to stretch out and engulf her, casting strange, distorted shapes on the walls. Her breath was shallow, anxiety tightening around her chest like a vice. She had come this far. She had followed every lead, fought every instinct, every shred of doubt, just to end up here, trapped in the belly of the beast, face to face with the very people who had orchestrated the nightmare that had become her life. And standing in front of her, with a calm, calculated smile on his face, was her boss, the CEO, the man who had always seemed so untouchable, so beyond reproach. But as Emily's gaze fixed on him, she realized the truth. He wasn't untouchable. He was the puppet master, pulling strings from the shadows, controlling everything, and now, she was the final piece in his twisted puzzle. "You've done well to get this far," the CEO said, his voice smooth and calculating, as if he was delivering a rehearsed line. "But you should know, Emily, it was never really about you. You were just a test. A test to see how far you'd go, how far you'd fall for the game." His words sent a chill down her spine, but she couldn't back down now. She had come this far, discovered too much, learned too many secrets, to stop now. She clenched her fists at her sides, fighting the surge of panic that threatened to overwhelm her. "What game, exactly? What do you want from me?" The CEO's smile never wavered. "It's not about what I want from you. It's about control. Power. The ability to manipulate people like you, people who think they're in control. People who think they have a choice. But in the end, they don't." Emily's mind raced as she processed his words. This wasn't just about a corporate takeover. It wasn't about a job or even the power behind it. This was about something much bigger. Something insidious. Something that made her feel small and insignificant in the face of it all. The realization hit her like a gut punch. This wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a system. A system designed to crush people like her, to make them feel like they were winning while they were being quietly, methodically destroyed. And she was the final step in that system. Her gaze flicked to the others in the room. The figures in the dark suits, standing like silent sentinels, watching her every move. They had been a part of this plan all along. She was just the last cog in the machine. But she wasn't going to be a pawn anymore. Not now. Not after everything she had uncovered. You think you can control me? You think you can break me? Emily's voice shook, but she stood her ground, her eyes locked on the CEO, her body tense, every muscle ready to spring into action. You've made one big mistake. I'm not just a player in your game. I'm the one who's going to bring it all down. The CEO's eyes narrowed, his expression faltering for just a second, but it was enough. Emily felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't just another piece on the board. She wasn't going to let him win. She had spent too long running from the truth, hiding in the shadows, but now she was done hiding. With every ounce of strength she had left, Emily reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the one piece of evidence she'd been clinging to, a small, seemingly insignificant flash drive. She had stolen it from his office earlier, before everything went south, but she hadn't known what was on it. She only knew it was important. Crucial. The CEO's eyes flickered to the flash drive, and a look of recognition passed over his face. So, you finally figured it out, he murmured, his voice laced with a dark amusement. But it's too late. You're too late. Before Emily could react, there was a sudden movement. One of the figures in the room, a man who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she recognized him. It was Lucas. But the man she had once trusted, the one who had warned her, who had seemed like her only ally, was no longer the person she thought he was. He wasn't just playing both sides. He was working for them. He had always been working for them. The twist hit her like a sledgehammer, the full weight of the betrayal crashing down in an instant. You. Emily choked, her voice barely a whisper. You were behind this. All along. Lucas's expression remained cold, calculating. There was no remorse in his eyes. No guilt. You were a means to an end, Emily. You were always disposable, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. The plan was to bring you in, get you to trust me, and then use you as leverage. And you played right into it. Her world crumbled in an instant. The man she had trusted, the one she had confided in, the one she had believed was on her side, had been manipulating her from the start. She had been nothing more than a pawn in his game, a tool to be used and discarded. The emotional weight of the betrayal threatened to crush her, but there was no time to mourn. No time to dwell on what had been lost. She looked back at the CEO, whose smug smile had only grown wider, knowing that the final piece of the puzzle was now in his hands. It's over, Emily, he said, his voice low and final. You've played your part. Now it's time for you to step aside. But Emily wasn't ready to step aside. Not now. Not after everything she had been through. She wasn't going to let them win. Not like this. In a flash of determination, she slammed the flash drive onto the nearest table, watching as it slid across the surface toward the CEO. You think I'm powerless, she spat. You think you can break me? This drive has everything. Everything you've worked so hard to keep hidden. You're done. The CEO's eyes went wide for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. The moment of hesitation. The split second where he realized just how close he had come to losing everything. The flash drive contained files, emails, and evidence that would expose the entire operation, the corporate manipulation, the threats, the destruction of lives. And once it was out in the open, the game would be over. But before the CEO could react, Lucas lunged forward, knocking the drive off the table and sending it skidding across the room. The tension in the air was suffocating, the stakes higher than ever. Lucas was desperate now. Desperate to keep the truth buried. But it was too late. Emily knew what she had to do. She dove for the drive, grabbing it with a strength she didn't know she had. As she slid it back into her pocket, she stood tall, facing Lucas and the CEO with a new resolve. She wasn't going to be their pawn any longer. The final battle wasn't about physical strength. It wasn't about the power of the people in the room. It was about the truth. And the truth was on her side. With one final, defiant look at the CEO and Lucas, Emily turned and made her way toward the door. She didn't know what would happen next, what the consequences would be, but she knew one thing, she had one. And the world would know the truth. Just as she reached for the door, the lights flickered, and a loud crash echoed from the other side of the room. A voice, one she hadn't expected to hear, rang out through the chaos. Not so fast. Her hand froze mid-motion, her heart racing. The door slammed shut behind her. It wasn't over yet, the silence that filled the room was deafening. Emily stood frozen, her hand still on the doorknob, her heart beating wildly in her chest. She had thought it was over, that she had finally taken control, but the voice that had stopped her in her tracks sent a chill down her spine. She turned slowly, her pulse quickening, only to face a shadow emerging from the corner of the room. It was someone she didn't expect, someone she didn't recognize, but who, somehow, felt like a part of this twisted puzzle. "Who are you?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper, the weight of everything pressing down on her. The figure stepped into the light, and for a moment, everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. It was a woman, tall and sharp-featured, with eyes that glinted with the same cold calculation that had defined the CEO's demeanor. But there was something else in her expression, something familiar. Something almost comforting. "I'm the one who's been watching over you," the woman said, her voice soft, but with an undeniable authority. "You thought you were alone, but you never were." Not really. Emily's mind raced. Watching over her. She had no idea who this woman was, but the way she spoke, the way she looked at her, made her feel as if the pieces of the puzzle were about to fall into place in a way she had never imagined. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization dawned on her. You were the one who sent the messages? The warnings?" Emily asked, stepping back in disbelief. The web of deceit, betrayal, and manipulation that had ensnared her felt like it was unraveling in front of her eyes. The woman's lips curved into a thin smile. "Yes. I was," she said simply. "I knew they would come for you, eventually. But I didn't expect you to make it this far. You've done well, Emily." The weight of her words hung heavily in the air, but Emily couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of confusion. This wasn't how she had imagined this ending. She had expected a confrontation, a final showdown with the CEO, with Lucas, with everything she thought she understood. But this was something entirely different. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me sooner?" Emily asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of frustration and relief. "You could have saved me all of this pain, all of this mess." The woman sighed softly, her gaze distant as she stepped closer. "Because you had to see it for yourself. You had to understand that you weren't just caught in the crossfire. You were part of the fire. Everything you've experienced, all the things you've learned, they've led you here for a reason. I couldn't take that away from you." It was then that Emily realized the truth. This wasn't just about the job. It wasn't about the promotion or the betrayal of people she had once trusted. This was about power. It was about knowing the system and how it worked, understanding the undercurrents that guided everything from the corporate world to the very fabric of society. Emily had been thrust into a world where every move she made, every decision, had consequences. And now, standing in front of this woman, she understood. This was a game, one that she could no longer pretend she was not part of. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, and the very forces she had thought she was fighting against were the same forces that had given her the strength to survive. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the realization hanging between them. Emily's mind was spinning, but as the silence deepened, she knew that the choices she had made were hers alone. The truth, no matter how uncomfortable, had always been there, waiting for her to uncover it. She could turn back now, pretend none of this had happened, but she knew that doing so would be the same as giving up. The very thing she had been running from was the thing that would finally set her free. "I'm done running," Emily said, her voice steady now, with a newfound sense of purpose. The anger and confusion that had once clouded her thoughts seemed to dissipate, replaced by clarity. "I'm going to expose everything. I'll make sure the world knows what happened." The woman looked at her, her expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, approval, perhaps. "You don't have to do this alone, Emily," she said, her tone softer now. "There are more of us. We've been waiting for someone like you, someone who can see the truth, even when it's been buried for so long. The system is rigged, but it's not invincible. You can be the one to change it." For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a spark of hope. The journey had been long, exhausting, and full of deception. But she had made it. She had fought and survived, not just because of the people around her, but because of the strength she had found within herself. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that interview weeks ago. She had been broken, twisted, manipulated, but now she was whole. Now, she was ready to take the fight to those who had tried to destroy her and to everyone who had ever been part of this dark system. But just as she turned to leave, to step into the next phase of the battle, the woman's voice stopped her again. "You're not safe yet," the woman warned, her eyes narrowing. "There are more people watching, more layers to this game than you can imagine. And not everyone is on your side, Emily." Emily froze, the weight of her words sinking in. It wasn't over. Not yet. But it would be. And she would make sure of it. As Emily left the building, her mind swirling with the gravity of everything she had learned, she knew the fight was far from over. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had been caught in the system's grip, for those who didn't have the strength to escape, for those who didn't even know they were part of the game. The road ahead would be long, and it would be dangerous, but Emily was no longer afraid. She had nothing left to lose. And she would make sure that the truth, the full, unfiltered truth, was heard, no matter the cost. But just as she stepped out into the dim street, ready to face whatever came next, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from an unknown number. It read, "You've made a powerful enemy. And they won't stop until you're destroyed." The words sent a shiver down her spine, but she didn't flinch. She was ready. And this time, she wasn't backing down. As she looked up at the skyline, the city that had once seemed so welcoming now felt like a battleground. And Emily was ready to take it on, to fight, to survive, and to uncover the truth, no matter what. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The game was still in motion. And there was so much more at stake than she could possibly understand. The screen fades to black.